Hello, everyone. It's time to read and discuss the third part of Sexing the Cherry by Jeanette Winterson. What is love? On the morning after our arrival at Wimbledon, I awoke in a pool of philosophic thought, though comforted by Jordan's regular breathing and the snorts of my 30 dogs. I am too huge for love. No one, male or female, has ever dared to approach me. They are afraid to scale mountains. I wonder about love, because the parson says that only God can truly love us, and the rest is lust and selfishness. In church, there are carvings of a man with his members swollen out like a marrow, rutting a woman whose teats swish the ground like a cow before milking. She has her eyes closed, and he looks up to heaven, and neither of them notice the grass is on fire. The parson had these carvings done especially so that we would contemplate our sin and where it must lead. There are women, too, hot with lust, their mouths sucking at each other, and men grasping one another the way you would a cattle prod. We file past every Sunday to humble ourselves and stay clean for another week, but I have noticed a bulge here and there where all should be quiet and godlike. For myself, the love I've known has come from my dogs, who care nothing for how I look, and from Jordan, who says that though I am as wide and muddy as the river that is his namesake, so am I too his kin. As for the rest of this sinning world, they treat me well enough for my knowledge and pass me by when they can. I breed boarhounds as my father did before me, and as I hoped Jordan would do after me. But he would not stay. His head was stuffed with stories of other continents where men have their faces in their chests, and some hop on one foot, defying the weight of nature. These hoppers cover a mile at a bound, and desire no sustenance other than tree bark. It is well known that their companions are serpents, the very beasts that drove us all from paradise and makes us still to sin. These beasts are so wily that if they hear the notes of a snake charmer, they lay one ear to the earth and stopper up the other with their tails. Would I save myself from sin by stoppering up my ears with a tail or any manner of thing? I am a sinner, not in body, but in mind. I know what love sounds like because I have heard it through the wall, but I do not know what it feels like. What can it be like? Two bodies slippery as eels on a mud flat, panting like dogs after a pig? I fell in love once, if love be that cruelty which takes us straight to the gates of paradise only to remind us they are closed forever. There was a boy who used to come by with a coat full of things to sell. Beads and ribbons hung on the inside, and his pockets were crammed with fruit knives and handkerchiefs and buckles and bright thread. He had a face that made me glad. I used to get up an hour early and comb my hair, which normally I would do only at Christmas time in honor of our Savior. I decked myself in my best clothes like a bullock at a fair, but none of this made him notice me, and I felt my heart shrivel to the size of a pea. Whenever he turned his back to leave, I always stretched out my hand to hold him a moment, but his shoulder blades were too sharp to touch. I drew his image in the dirt by my bed and named all my mother's chickens after him. Eventually I decided that true love must be clean love, and I boiled myself a cake of soap. I hate to wash, for it exposes the skin to contamination. I follow the habit of King James, who only ever washed his fingertips and yet was pure and hard enough to give us the Bible in good English. I hate to wash, but knowing it to be a symptom of love, I was not surprised to find myself creeping towards the pump in the dead of night like a ghoul to a tomb. I had determined to cleanse all of my clothes, my underclothes and myself. And I did this in one passage by plying at the pump handle, first with my right arm and washing my left self, then with my left arm and washing my right self. When I was so drenched that to wring any part of me left a puddle at my feet, I waited outside the baker's until she began her work, and sat myself by the ovens until morning. I had a white coating from the flour, but that served to make my swarthy skin more fair. In this new state I presented myself to my loved one, who graced me with all of his teeth at once, and swore that only if he could reach my mouth he would kiss me there and then. I swept him from his feet and said, "Kiss me now," and closed my eyes for the delight. I kept them closed for some 5 minutes, and then, opening them to see what had happened, I saw that he had fainted dead away. I carried him to the pump that had last seen my devotion, and doused him good and hard, until he came to, wriggling like a trapped fox, and begged me to let him down. "What is it?" I cried. "Is it love for me that affects you so?" "No," he said. "It is terror." I saw him a few months later in another part of town with a pretty jade on his arm and his face as bright as ever. In the morning the young girl, whose name was Zillah, told me she had been locked in this tower since her birth. "This is not a tower," I said. "It is a house of some stature, but nothing more." "No," she said. "You are mistaken. Go to the window." I did as she said, and looked down a few feet over a street setting up for market. Women in leather aprons were piling radishes on wooden stalls. A priest was blessing a cargo of holy relics, while a saintly man, come early, was arguing over the price of a rib. It was a fine morning. The air smelt of lemons. As I looked down, a stall-holder turned his face and stared directly at me. I waved and smiled, but he gave no sign of recognition. It did not trouble me. People are nervous of strangers. "Is that not terrifying?" said Zillah. Then I knew she must be having a game with me, and I went and pulled her to the window. "Come and see this steeple of radishes." She was silent. I noticed how pale her face was, and that her eyes were unnaturally bright. I leaned over to point to anything that might please her, but the words stuck out the roof of my mouth. She was gazing down. I followed her gaze, down and further down. We were at the top of a sheer-built tower. The stone cylinder fell without relief to a platform of bitter rock smashed by foaming waves. The coastline winding away was desolate of living things. No hut or sheepfold broke the line of tangled rosemary bushes. There was nothing but the wind and the slate-blue sea. She pulled away from me and went to sit down on the bed. With my back to the window, I asked her what it was that kept her here. "It is myself," she said. "Only myself." It was then I realized the room had no door. "Is there anything for me to eat?" I asked her. She smiled, leaned under the bed, and pulled out 2 rats by their tails. She laughed and walked towards me, the rats in each hand. Her eyes were clouding over. Her eyes were disappearing. I could smell her breath like cheese and muslin. I did not think of my life. I somersaulted out of the window and landed straight in the pile of radishes. The woman in the leather apron hit me over the head, but someone behind her, pulling her off, took me by the shoulders and urged me to tell him where I had come from so suddenly. "From the tower," I said, pointing upwards. The market stopped its bustle, and all fell to the ground and made the sign of the cross. The purveyor of holy relics hung a set of martyr's teeth round his neck and sprinkled me with the dust of St. Anthony. The story was a terrible one. The young girl, caught incestuously with her sister, was condemned to build her own death tower. To prolong her life, she built it as high as she could, winding round and round with the stones in an endless stairway. When there were no stories left, she sealed the room in the village, driven mad by her death cries, evacuated to a far-off spot where no one could hear her. Many years later, the tower had been demolished by a foreigner who had built the house I saw in its place. Slowly the village had returned, but not the foreigner, nor anyone else, could live in the house. At night the cries were too loud. The villagers were kind to me, and I helped them through the day with their stalls of exotic fruit and speckled fish, and at night the men filled their pipes and sat on the sea-wall and asked me where I had come from, and why. I did not tell them the strange means of my arrival, but I explained the destination of my heart. "The world is full of dancers," said one, blowing the smoke in circles round my head. "And you have seen this one only by night," said another. "And escaping down a wall," said his wife, who was scraping crab meat into a pot. The philosopher of the village warned me that love is better ignored than explored, for it is easier to track a barnacle goose than to follow the trajectories of the heart. There followed a discourse on love, some of which I will reveal to you. On the one side there were those who claimed that love, if it be allowed at all, must be kept tame by marriage vows and family ties so that its fiery heat warms the hearth but does not burn down the house. On the other, there were those who believed that only passion freed the soul from its mud hut, and that only by loosing the heart like a coursing hare and following it until sundown could a man or woman sleep quietly at night. The school of heaviness, who would tie down love, took as their examples those passages of ancient literature which promise that those driven by desire, the lightest of things, suffer under weights they cannot bear, weights far more terrible than to accept from the start that passion must spend its life in chains. What of the woman who finds herself turning into a lotus tree as she flees her ardent lover? Her feet are rooted to the earth, soft bark creeps up her legs, and little by little enfolds her groin. When she tries to tear her hair, her hands are full of leaves. What of Orpheus, who pursues his passion through the gates of hell, only to fail at the last moment and to lose the common presence of his beloved? And Actaeon, whose desire for Artemis turns him into a stag and leaves him torn to pieces by his own dogs? These things are so, and may be laid out in a solemn frieze to run round the edges of the world. Then I stood up and reminded the company of Penelope, who through her love for one man refused the easy compromise of a gilded kingdom, and unravelled by night the woven weight of a day's work to leave her hands empty again in the morning. And of Sappho, who rather than lose her lover to a man flung herself from the windy cliffs and turned her body into a bird. It is well known that those in the grip of heavy enchantments can be wakened only by a lover's touch. Those who seem dead, who are already returning to the earth, can be restored to life, quickened again by one who is warm. Then, it being night, and the twin stars of Castor and Pollux just visible in the sky, I spoke of that tragedy, of two brothers whose love we might find unnatural, so stricken in grief when one was killed that the other, begging for his life again, accepted instead that for half the year one might live, and for the rest of the year the other, but never the two together. So it is for us, who while on earth in these suits of lead sense the presence of one we love, not far away, but too far to touch. The villagers were silent, and one by one began to move away, each in their own thoughts. A woman brushed my hair back with her hand. I stayed where I was with my shoulders against the rough sea wall, and asked myself what I hadn't asked the others. Was I searching for a dancer whose name I did not know, or was I searching for the dancing part of myself? Night. In the dark and in the water, I weigh nothing at all. I have no vanity, but I would enjoy the consolation of a lover's face. After my only excursion into love, I resolved never to make a fool of myself again. I was offered a job in a whorehouse, but I turned it down on account of my frailty of heart. Surely such toing and froing as must go on night and day weakens the heart and inclines it to love? Not directly, you understand, but indirectly, for lust without romantic matter must be wearisome after a time. I asked a girl at the Spitalfields' house about it, and she told me she hates her lovers by the hour, but still longs for someone to come in a coach and feed her on mince pies. Where do they come from, these insubstantial dreams? As for Jordan, he has not my common sense, and will no doubt follow his dreams to the end of the world, and then fall straight off. I cannot school him in love, having no experience, but I can school him in its lack, and perhaps persuade him that there are worse things than loneliness. A man accosted me on our way to Wimbledon, and asked me if I should like to see him. I see you well enough, sir, I replied. Not all of me, said he, and unbuttoned himself to show a thing much like a pea-pod. Touch it and it will grow, he assured me. I did so, and indeed it did grow to look more like a cucumber. Wondrous, 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 he swooned, though I could see no good reason for swooning. Put it in your mouth, he said. Yes, as you would a delicious thing to eat. I like to broaden my mind when I can, and I did as he suggested, swallowing it up entirely and biting it off with a snap. As I did so, my eager fellow increased his swooning to the point of fainting away, and I, feeling both astonished by his rapture and disgusted by the leathery thing filling up my mouth, spat out what I had not eaten and gave it to one of my dogs. The whore from Spitalfields had told me that men like to be consumed in the mouth, but it still seems to me a reckless act, for the member must take some time to grow again. None the less their bodies are their own, and I who know nothing of them must take instruction humbly, and if a man asks me to do the same again, I'm sure I shall, though for myself I felt nothing. In copulation, an act where the woman has a more pleasurable part, the member comes away in the great tunnel and creeps into the womb, where it splits open after a time like a runner bean and deposits a little mannikin to grow in the rich soil. At least, so I am told by women who have become pregnant and must know their husbands' members as well as I do my own dog's. When Jordan is older, I will tell him what I know about the human body and urge him to be careful of his member. And yet it is not that part of him I fear for. It is his heart. His heart. Here at Wimbledon we have a French gardener named André Mollet, who has come specially to teach Tredescant the French ways with water fountains and parterres. Like most Frenchmen, he is more interested in his member than in his spade, and has made amorous overtures to every woman on the estate, with the exception of myself. In honor of his tirelessness, we are to have a stream shooting 9 feet high with a silver ball balanced at the top. The cascading torrent will mingle with a wall of water like a hedge, dividing the fish ponds from the peasantry. The fish ponds are circles and squares filled with rare waters, sometimes salt, sometimes still, containing fabulous fishes of the kind imagined but never seen. In the largest pond are a shoal of flying fish that toss their glittering bodies in one leap from one side to the other. Do they dream of tree-tops buffeted by the wind? In another, a curious pool, shining with its own radiance from a holy well in the east, are a group of spotted toads notable for their singing. These toads do not croak, but engage in madrigals instead of an anthem more fair than any choir in church. Even the palace of the Sun King in France has nothing so rare and wonderful, though I am told he has a dancing weasel given in exchange for 100 pear trees. For myself, I prefer the running stream that leads from the bank planted with cherry and makes a basin in the grotto with the statue of the hermit. The stream is shallow, its bottom crowded with tiny pebbles, its sides sprouting watercress. Underneath the stones are freshwater shrimps feeding on creatures even smaller than themselves. There is a rock near to its source, and I very often hide behind it at evening, singing songs of love and death and waiting for the sun to set. When the orange bar is straight across the horizon, the kingfisher comes with blue wings beating and dives in one swift streak, a sense like a saint, vertical and glorious, its beak crammed with shrimp. At sea and away from home in a creaking boat, with Tredescant sleeping beside me, there is a town I sometimes dream about, whose inhabitants are so cunning that to escape the insistence of creditors they knock down their houses in a single night and rebuild them elsewhere. So the number of buildings in the city is always constant, but they are never in the same place from one day to the next. For close families, and most of the people in the city are close families, this presents no problem, and it is more usual than not for the escapees to find their pursuers waiting for them on the new site of their choice. As a subterfuge, then, it has little to recommend it, but as a game it is a most fulfilling pastime and accounts for the extraordinary longevity of the men and women who live there. We were all nomads once, and crossed the deserts and the seas on tracks that could not be detected, but were clear to those who knew the way. Since settling down and rooting like trees, but without the ability to make use of the wind to scatter our seed, we have found only infection and discontent. In the city the inhabitants have reconciled two discordant desires, to remain in one place and to leave it behind forever. On arriving there for the first time, I made friends with the family, and after dinner promised to call the next day. They urged me to do so, and I did, and was upset to find that the little house had been replaced by a museum of antiquities. The curator was sympathetic and pointed me in the right direction. I had it in mind to go back to the museum and look at the skeleton of an extinct whale. It seemed unlikely to me that a public building would feel the same need to escape as an ordinary individual. I was mistaken. The museum had gone back to its original site by the docks, and in its place, with room to spare, was a windmill. As I watched the blades churning the air, and wondered what kind of element air must be, to seem like nothing and yet put up such resistance, the miller came to his round window and yelled something I couldn't hear. I caught myself hold one of the blades as it passed by me and swung myself up beside him. He asked me if I knew the story of the 12 dancing princesses. I said I had heard it, and he told me they were still living just down the road, though of course they were quite a bit older now. Why didn't I go and see them? Thinking that one dancer might well know another, and that a dozen of them must surely know one, I took a catch of herrings as a gift and banged on their door. And that's it for the third part. What do you guys think of this so far? I kind of am interested to see where Jordan's mysterious, pretty unrealistic journey is taking him. Do you think he's gonna find the dancer that he searches for? I can't wait to hear more about the 12 dancing princesses. So I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Thank you so much for listening. And please let me know everything that you're thinking about it. If you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. But I'm sure I'm not going to understand the whole book even when I'm finished reading it, because that's what good literature is. I think you should always be learning something new every time you read a book. So hopefully you're understanding it enough to enjoy it. Even though I'm a little confused, as I'm sure some of you are, and some of you have actually told me that you don't quite follow the story, I'm sure that I'm going to be entertained more as we get deeper into the story. Believe it or not, this is actually about a third of the book so far. So this is my third chapter. We'll have more or less 6 more chapters, I guess. Maybe 10 if I make them smaller, depending on the unit divisions that I haven't fully mapped out yet. So thank you guys, and I look forward to reading for you again in the future. And the next section we're going to be reading, well, it's the first section that has a name, the story of the 12 dancing princesses. So we'll get some of that at the next reading. Great, take care, guys.